As Graham mentioned, I want to talk about some of the outcomes of some research we've actually been doing at Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane. So to everyone listening, good morning, good evening, good night, whatever time it is for you at the moment, thank you for being here. So I also want to acknowledge that the work that we've done in here has some related papers that have been published about it. On this front page here, I've got the co-authors of those papers who've worked with me. Two of them are from the Business Process Management discipline at QUT. So research has been going through a lot of change. I wrote what was on this slide before we've been going through COVID, and we've just heard about some of the impacts of that. So it has been growing steadily around the world. We're now in much more tenuous times right now, but we've seen research income steadily increasing. In Australia, it's gone up about 5-fold in the last 2 decades. And with this, we've seen an increasing number of support staff, many of you filling those sort of roles who are listening here today, in an administrative and strategic level. And so this is what is commonly referred to as research management. In some areas, it's called research administration or various other names you may have heard. Just quickly, for those not aware, I want to give a bit of a background of the research environment in Australia, because this really feeds into what the context of where Australia is at the moment in this field. So we have 3 major government-led reporting initiatives that have been driving a lot of how things are done at university for a while. The first one is the oldest, which is called the HERD-C, the Higher Education Research Data Collection. It's every year the university needs to report on its research income that's been received from various grants or from commercial research. It needs to report on research outputs, so various papers, and particularly in this format, it was looking at papers, book chapters, books, and conference papers. And so that was discontinued in 2016, the research outputs component, but the research income one still continues today. From this, universities would be awarded certain levels of block grant funding, which would go to support the work of research based on the amount that they had brought in. So it very much had a quantity focus in terms of the more papers that you publish, the more that you could say that you're on there, the bigger slice of pie that you would receive in theory. There was a little bit more maths involved than that, but in terms of how universities viewed it, they tried to put, academics could often feel like there was a dollar value to each paper that they got published. We've subsequently had a new initiative which has borrowed heavily from the UK's REF framework, and that's the ERA, Excellence in Research for Australia. So this was happening every 3 years. There's been a bit of a gap from the most recent. The most recent was 2018, and currently it's slated to run in 2023. And this looks at income, outputs, patents, and some other features. And in this compares them to the world standard, and will give them a rating of 1 to 5 based on the field of research that it's occurring in. So all of these get coded against a series of field of research codes that the government defines. And within this, the focus has therefore been much more on quality. You need to have a certain quantity to be considered in a particular field. But once you do that, the important thing isn't the quantity of papers or income that you have there, but the quality of that. Specifically with outputs, it's focusing on quality. And so this has meant a change in the landscape where previously there was very much a emphasis on publishing a lot. There now has become a greater focus at universities in Australia of publishing high quality work. So that can be difficult to quantify. Sometimes that's looking at citations. The Shimago journal rankings are often used to say we need to publish in Q1 journals. And so there's real different drivers now, that rather than doing 2 poor papers, you're better off doing 1 really good paper in a high quality journal that's more likely to be cited. So the focus has really changed within that. The new initiative that started up, once again borrowing from the UK, is the engagement and impact. This was first run in 2018, and this was looking at industry engagement and the impact of research. And so industry engagement, looking at the collaborations you had with different areas, looking at the funding that you'd receive from industry partners to do work, or looking at ways that you might have been external supervisors of HDR students, various collaborations that would go on. Impact is looking at the real world translation of your research and really trying to assess that the work that's being done isn't just existing in high quality journals and in the ivory tower of research, but is getting out into the real world, being adopted in government policy, having implications for people in their everyday lives. And so I was really looking at the translation of research into practice. So this was initially done as an additional assessment to ERA. And once again, the focus was on quality, but not just on the quality of the research that was done, but how that research was engaging outside. And so you can see the narrative of how in Australia we've gone from initially a very rudimentary metric that was looking at how much are you doing, to going how well are you doing that, to how well is that translating. Look, there's issues with this framework. I'm not going to claim that Australia has it perfect, and there's major revisions and considerations going on around it, but this is something that is of great, you can see the drive that's happening here, the gradual progression. And with each of these levels, there is obviously a lot of extra administrative work that's required. Now, back to my earlier point of research management. Now, for a lot of you, you probably have some awareness of what this means based on the area that you're working in. A basic definition of it from an international study that was done was saying that any activity instigated at the level of an institution which seeks to add value to the research activity of staff without being part of the research process itself. So really going work that isn't conducting the research, but everything that helps that research to flourish. Although there's a stack of things that go on there with that. You can see here just a bunch of the words that might get thrown around. And so there's a lot of different ways to view this, a lot of different areas. We're talking about finances, we're talking about grants management, we're talking about ethics, we might be talking about governance, policy, procedure, etc. Lots of components that can be supporting research in some capacity. I've got 3 key points that I would make here about this, is that it should be supporting the research activity of staff, or it could be providing governance to the research activity. So the first one is trying to help academics do their research well. The second one is trying to make sure that the right things are being done and that the university has good oversight of that. And the third one is that there might be organizational goals you're driving towards. There might be a particular area that a university wants to grow in. They want to become more research intensive in a particular field. And so there could be research management activities to drive towards that, to encourage that sort of research happening at the university. So within this, I've mentioned that there's a bunch of different terms. It tends to vary based on the area you're at and how people define it. Often it's viewed in a very organizational hierarchy lens. You talk about different groups that are doing it. You might have an Office of Research, an Office of Ethics and Integrity, and those get viewed as different parts of research management. But we often don't think about the connected nature of those, and trying to discuss it broader than just the organizational units that you're existing within can be quite challenging. A little bit about me and why this is of relevance to me. So I've been at QUT for over 10 years now. I initially started working with a research team there as a web and app developer, subsequently moved to the Office of Research, where I was working in reporting and system support. But since 2016, I've been on the Research Management Systems Upgrade Program, where we've been looking at replacing our existing system at QUT with other systems, one of which is Pure, and have been working in the field of business process management, doing some study at the same time. So I mentioned the Research Management Systems Upgrade Program. And so the current system we've got at the university has been there for about 20 years. It's heavily integrated. There's a lot of custom workarounds. People have fields have been used for different purposes and have things shoved in there, and it's all very difficult and complicated to work with. To replace this, we're actually going with a suite of new systems, which I'll touch on later, and you can get some ideas of the sort of number of people at the university that we're dealing with in the system. But so as part of this work, it was really identified we needed a common framework to talk about things, that the way of discussing research management activities, people very much knew their own space, but they didn't look at that collectively. So we wanted a way to discuss this that we could be using in materials that would be easily digestible for people, that we could put up on a slide, that they would get it and understand it right away. Something that didn't cling to an organizational hierarchy, but was very agnostic. And look, it's fortunate we've done that, because while the program's been going on, there's been multiple restructures that have occurred. So we need to be able to deal with something that doesn't rely on the existing structure, because that's going to change. And that it was inclusive of all areas. So it wasn't just focused on one particular stream, but could be connected in. So we had an issue that often things that were developed would feel very research grants heavy, and so that people in the commercial research space might go, oh, that's not for us, that's for research grants. But part of what we really wanted to do was work with these areas to get them to understand that there was a lot of similarities between the work that they do, so that that could be better combined. And so for this, we started developing a reference process model. And so this leverages the business process management discipline, as I mentioned before. And so this really tries to get away from just an organizational hierarchy and goes through looking at the process from start to end. So it'll cross across areas, look at it holistically. Does this so that things can be done more effectively and efficiently. And it gives, by using a process model, you can give a holistic view of the key processes in a hierarchy. It allows you to understand those processes and identify opportunities for improvement. So that's what we set out to develop. We used an action design research process, which involves a couple of key steps. That is problem formulation, building intervention and evaluation, and reflection and learning. And there's iterations of these that you go through in a number of cycles. And so we had, in our first cycle, we initially developed a model that we thought worked internally to the team, took it out to people, got their consideration. We then started engaging with different areas to work through. We have a paper that details all of this if you want more information of it, and the second one coming out later of the further validation of the model that I'll get to as well. But so we went through a number of stages, iterating through, adding in more features as we went through the process. And at the end, realizing that we needed to really do external validation. This was all done internally to QUT, and we needed to work with other universities and vendors and people to make sure that it was applicable beyond just the QUT context. So we've gone through that separately. We've now done a number of focus groups and one-on-one interviews with 25 experts from Australia and abroad. We looked at 3 different metrics: utility, quality, and efficacy of how the model worked, that we've then been able to code together. And there's now a version 5 of the model based upon this that was released last month. We've got a lot of positive stories of people already adopting the model into their universities or organizations and being able to use it for strategy, for training materials, etc. So talking about all that, what is the reference model? So you can see this is the high-level overview of it, which is keeping it quite high level. There's a lot more detail that we'll get into, but you can see that at its highest level, there are 10 different domains we've got listed here. Starting out, and most of this represents the life cycle of a project in domains 1 through 8. So you can see we have project conception that flows into, there'll be some sort of contract development, a project setup, etc., that will then lead into research outputs and some sort of reporting that comes out of that. We've got a separate wheel there for HDR management to represent that, that term we're referring to higher degree research students. So students doing PhDs or masters by research, something with a thesis as part of it. And so for those studies, there will tend to be a mini project themselves going on, but there's a lot of extra items that are applied as part of that that are covered off in the model there. And wrapping all around this, we have the domain of strategic management, which I'll talk about in a moment. If we go into one of the areas more specifically, so you can see here that for each of those domains, those 10 domains I mentioned, they have a number of areas of activity listed there, which are the different wedges of the pie. And underneath each of those is a number of processes listed. So you can see here that there's just within project conception, that then breaks down to 7 different areas of activity with a number of processes underneath it. And so we do this for each of the stages. Hence the reason that we have a high-level overview at the beginning, because there's a lot of detail going on in here. But through this, it doesn't necessarily represent the logical path that every project will follow, that there is naturally bouncing back and forth that will occur in here, but it details a number of the items so that you can work through it. I mentioned strategic management. So here we're talking about the strategic goals that will be set by the university that might be laid out to try to better support research management heading in different directions. So this is a new innovation in the reference model based on the feedback we received. There was a number of items that weren't properly captured, things like infrastructure, e-research, looking at policies and procedures that might be set up. And so we've tried to capture that within here, within these elements. It's still quite undefined, but a lot of these, because they are sort of strategic, will be sort of quite custom to each area. It's different than saying this is the way that we manage a particular research grant that comes into the office. This is talking about how we might have a specific program that's trying to address a goal and vague categories that they can fall into. So you can see in terms of the benefits of this, it allows you to present this information in a much more standardized way. You're able to communicate it better. We've used this throughout. You can see on the side there's a presentation we've got of it as a giant poster that we have printed out in the office that will be used as a discussion point, highlighting various items on it, and have been really driving the process through it. Different universities have also been picking it up for similar purposes to drive their research management projects. As I mentioned, people are using it in training materials, onboarding. There's a lot of things you can do with this to give people an introduction to the field at varying levels or to drive process change. In terms of what we're doing at QUT, just to give you a quick overview of how we're applying this to the systems we're talking about. So we are, I mentioned using Pure, but we're starting out using funding institutional, which I'll actually be presenting on as part of a funding institutional talk on Thursday for those interested on how we'll be using it. But we can identify opportunities in there, which will be synced into Pure, leading to academics creating applications. We'll then be connecting into our contracts management system where we can define the contract, do the sign off. Once the application is approved, it becomes an award. From that award, we will then have ethics managed in a separate system, which will be linked back into the system via another integration. We then, any research outputs that are generated as part of the awarded funding will then be recorded and linked up within Pure. We then have our student management system, which will be sending information into Pure in the form of theses and also capturing information from our ethical management system. And then finally, we'll be using Pure as a common reporting and portal interface where we'll be bringing in all of this data together. And so being able to use the reference model, we've been really able to break down what purpose each of these systems is serving, how the pieces of data connect together, and the flow of those items coming through. So just in summary, so that's the reference model so far. We've done some validation with it. I'm keen for any feedback anyone has. My contact details are listed there, so please reach out. We've also, as I mentioned, got another paper, a journal article paper that's going to be submitted shortly on the validation that we've done. So that will be made available once it's there, but you can see some resources there for those if you're interested, as well as supporting tools and other things for the reference model. So if there's any questions, I'll take those now. Thank you.
Look, thanks, Jeremy. And it's great to see the maturity yet again in the model since I've seen it like 12 months ago. On your behalf, I know I was at the Pure conference only last year, and your poster, shall we say, generated a lot of interest. Yours and the team's poster generated a lot of interest, and it was great to see the feedback and what's changed since then. So one of the questions we had was from the audience, which was around some of the universities that have picked this up. Can you give us a sense of maybe either names or types of universities that have picked this up?
Okay. Look, so we've seen a variety of them so far. So we've had and I should say it's not just universities as well. We've also had various research institutes, government organizations that are showing some interest in picking it up to sort of look at their own activities that they're doing. I would say we've seen varying levels of universities. So one's smaller than QUT, one's larger than QUT have been looking at it and adopting it. So far, all Australian in context. We have spoken to some people internationally about it as well. And you know, part of that's just a proximity, but certainly any international listeners who look at the model and want to give feedback on how it can better apply to their context would be interested in that. But one of the things that we've seen was that one university was saying they were starting their own research management systems program to change the systems. And as part of the initial project initiation document, they actually referred to the model going, look, this is what we're currently doing, the systems we're using. They'd actually done a bit of a maturity assessment as part of that and had been able to go, look, we've leveraged these particular, we're doing well in these areas, but we're not so good in these ones. So to go, look, we're a 4 in this, we're a 5 in this, and so this is a space we need to grow in. And going, look, if we have a good system in this area, that could help us, lift ourselves a couple of levels. So that's really a valuable tool. Apparently it was very well received by the board that they sent it to, and secured good support on the basis of that. So I think that's really positive of going. A lot of universities, certainly when we started this, we need to create these sort of things ourselves from the ground up. And so I think if other people can leverage that, it's a really good resource for them to have.
Yeah, oh, thanks for that, Jeremy. And you've answered one of the other questions that they had indirectly, which was, I guess, what was some of the greatest benefits that QUT got out of this model? That I'm presuming it assisted you with this process.
Yeah, and I think just a quick story to tell about that. So one of the things, we previously had an Office of Research and an Office of Commercial Services. And they got merged together as part of a restructure. And what we found was that for a very long time, they were really two separate teams still in the same office. And the idea was that they were supposed to be doing things a similar sort of way. But they'd very much got used to using the system we currently have very differently from each other and talking about their work very differently. The reference model gave us a great way to be able to come into a session where nobody had a particular hat in the ring, because there was a lot of going, you do things this way, we do things this way, why can't you just do things the way we want to? Which is the solution we're going to pick? But coming in with the reference model, we're really able to get them away from that to go, okay, let's talk about project conception. What are you both doing here for these steps? How are you actually managing it? Let's talk about contract development. Now, for the grants, that probably happens after you've actually been awarded. For the commercial research, that probably happens before you've been awarded the funding. But you're still doing similar sort of steps there. You're negotiating with parties. You're trying to get the terms locked down. And then, you've got your budgets and approvals that need to go through. So that's really the key parts for you. So that was great to see them latch onto that.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thank you very much for your time. And I'm sure there's more to follow. And just follow Jeremy's slides. So thank you very much for your time, Jeremy.